Two people walked into the early Christian gathering with smiles on their faces. Within hours, both were dead. A husband, a wife, struck down without warning. A lie whispered in the shadows was dragged into the open. But here's the question. Was this truly the hand of God, swift and terrifying justice? Or was it a chilling tactic, meant to control a fragile movement through fear? What happened in that crowded room 2,000 years ago still echoes today. Stay with me, because this story may change how you see faith, power, and truth forever. Jerusalem. The year is around 33 or 34 AD. The city is alive with tension, a crossroads of empire, faith, and revolution. Roman soldiers patrol the streets, watching closely for uprisings. Merchants shout in crowded marketplaces, while priests ascend the steps of the great temple, determined to keep order. But beyond the walls of the temple, something new has begun. Something no empire, no priesthood, and no ruler can quite contain. Only weeks earlier, a crucified rabbi named Jesus of Nazareth had been declared risen from the dead. And from the shock of that claim, a movement was born. The apostles, Peter, John, James, men once too afraid to speak, now preached openly with a boldness no chains could silence. Crowds gathered daily, not just by the hundreds, but by the thousands. They listened to these men tell stories of Jesus healing the blind, raising the dead, and promising a kingdom not built on Roman steel but on God's Spirit. And strange things began to happen. The book of Acts records that the sick were brought out into the streets, and even the shadow of Peter passing by was said to bring healing. Miracles, signs, and wonders followed. The city buzzed with curiosity. Some were amazed, others outraged, but no one could ignore what was happening. And in the midst of this growing community, something remarkable took place. Those who joined the movement did not cling to their wealth or property. Instead, they sold what they had: land, houses, inheritances, and they laid the money at the apostles' feet so that no one among them would be in need. It was not forced. It was not demanded. It was a radical generosity, a voluntary sacrifice that shocked the world around them. Imagine a society where strangers treated one another as family, where possessions became secondary to faith. Among the examples, one man stood out: Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, better known by his nickname, Barnabas, the son of encouragement. He sold a field and gave the entire sum to the apostles. His act of devotion inspired many others, and his name became a symbol of selfless faith. But in every movement, not all motives remain pure. For behind the smiles, the handshakes, and the public gestures of generosity, some carried secret intentions. This is where our story begins, with a husband and wife named Ananias and Sapphira, respected members of this new community, seen in gatherings, welcomed at meals, perhaps even admired for their faith. But they would soon become remembered not for their devotion, but for a choice that would turn their names into a warning whispered for centuries. And so, as the crowds grew larger, and as the apostles' influence stretched further, Ananias and Sapphira stepped forward with their own offering. But behind their gift lay a deception that would shake the church to its core. And the question we must wrestle with is this: what price does a lie carry when it is told not just to people, but to God? If you believe truth always finds its way to the surface, hit subscribe now, because this story will challenge what you think you know about faith and fear. In the earliest days of this movement, one truth defined them: everything was shared. Acts chapter 4 tells us, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. It was radical. Property, once the symbol of status, was surrendered. Wealth, once a private treasure, was laid down. And this was not under pressure. No Roman decree forced it. No apostle demanded it. It was voluntary, and yet it became the heartbeat of the church. And in this heartbeat, one act rang louder than the rest. Barnabas, the man of encouragement, sold a field and brought the entire amount to the apostles. The gift was public. His name was spoken with admiration. To many, it was a symbol of what faith could look like when completely surrendered. But admiration can plant a seed, and where admiration grows, envy often follows. Ananias and Sapphira watched. Perhaps they applauded. Perhaps they nodded in approval. But in their hearts, another thought stirred. They too owned property. They too could give. And if they did, perhaps they would also be praised, respected, admired. So they sold a piece of land. The transaction was simple. But here is where the story shifts. Instead of bringing all the proceeds, they kept back part of the money for themselves. while pretending the sum they laid at the apostles' feet was the whole amount. It was not the withholding that was the sin. They were under no command to surrender everything. The deception was in the pretense. They wanted the honor of generosity without the sacrifice it demanded. And this deception could have remained buried. No one outside the couple knew the exact price of the land. No parchment recorded it. No witness carried the details. It was a lie that could have lived safely in the shadows. But the apostles insisted that the Spirit of God searched the heart. Nothing could be hidden. Not from him. Not even a whisper. Rumors began to stir. People in the community noticed things, small things. Perhaps a word that slipped. A hesitation in Sapphira's voice. The way Ananias avoided Peter's eyes. And slowly, unease crept through the gathering. The apostles spoke often about honesty, purity, holiness. And the more they preached, the heavier the guilt must have felt. Imagine the room that day. The crowd gathered close, sitting on stone floors, waiting as the offerings were brought forward. The air thick with silence. The clinking of coins echoing louder than normal. And in the center, Peter's gaze, piercing, unblinking, fixed. He was not a man trained in politics or rhetoric. He was a fisherman. Rough, direct, blunt. The same Peter who once denied Jesus now stood bold, filled with authority. And that authority fell on Ananias with the weight of iron. The hush in the gathering was suffocating. Everyone could feel it. Something was wrong. Something was about to be exposed. And in that moment, the decision of Ananias and Sapphira became not just about property, but about integrity, about the very survival of a fragile movement. Because if deception could take root here, at the beginning, what future could the church possibly have? The crowd leaned in, hearts pounded. The coins at Ananias' feet glimmered, a testimony and a trap all at once. And the question still lingers, echoing beyond Jerusalem, beyond the years, into our own hearts today. If no one would ever find out, would you still tell the truth? Or would you keep the profit for yourself? The room was still. The offering lay before the apostles. Ananias stood proudly, his face betraying no fear. To those around him, he looked like any other man giving generously. But Peter knew. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Ananias. And in a voice that cut sharper than any blade, he spoke. Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit? You have not lied to men, but to God. The words hung in the air like thunder. Every breath in the room stopped. And before anyone could move, Ananias crumpled to the ground. His body lifeless. Gasps filled the gathering. Some screamed. Others staggered back, clutching at walls. The silence that followed was not peace, it was terror. The young men stepped forward, their faces pale. With trembling hands, they wrapped the body in cloth. No words were spoken, only the shuffling of feet as they carried him out, the sound echoing down the stone steps into the streets of Jerusalem. But the story was not over. Hours later, his wife entered the gathering, unaware of what had happened. Perhaps she was searching for her husband. Perhaps she came to play her part, to confirm their story. Peter's eyes met hers, and the crowd watched in dreadful anticipation. He asked her a simple question. Tell me, Sapphira, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land? Her answer sealed her fate. Yes, she said, steady and confident, that is the price. And Peter's reply pierced through the room. How could you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? The feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also. Before the words had fully sunk in, her body collapsed. Just like her husband, lifeless on the ground, the same young men returned, their garments still stained with dust. They lifted her body, carried it out, and laid her beside her husband. Imagine the silence. Imagine the fear. A movement born in joy was suddenly marked by death. The laughter of shared meals, the songs of praise, the prayers of hope, all now overshadowed by two lifeless bodies, carried out within hours of one another. And great fear, the scriptures say, seized the whole church and all who heard what had happened. So the question is not just about them, but about us. Would you hold on to faith in this moment, or walk away in fear? Tell me in the comments. The deaths of Ananias and Sapphira spread like fire through the community. Acts 5 records it with chilling simplicity. Great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. The joy of miracles, the laughter of shared meals, the unity of thousands, all of it now mingled with awe and dread. This was not just about money. This was about whether deceit could live in a community meant to reflect heaven. And for those who knew their scriptures, the moment was not without precedent. Generations earlier, Nadab and Abihu, priests of Israel, offered strange fire before the Lord, fire he had not commanded. In an instant they were consumed. Their death was not random. It was a reminder, holiness cannot be mocked. Leviticus 10. Centuries later, Uzzah reached out to steady the Ark of the Covenant when the oxen stumbled. His intention seemed harmless, even good. But touching the Ark was forbidden. The holiness of God broke out against him, and he fell dead beside it. 2 Samuel 6. Again and again, Scripture whispered the same truth. God is holy. His presence is not to be trifled with. So when Ananias and Sapphira fell, the early church understood. This was not merely punishment. It was a divine marker, a line in the sand. But how should we interpret it? Some see in this moment divine justice. That God's holiness demanded accountability. That in these fragile first days of the church, deceit could not be allowed to grow like a cancer in the body of believers. If integrity crumbled here, the entire foundation of the movement would be compromised. Others see it as a practical warning, that the story itself, whether miraculous or symbolic, was meant to remind believers that the church was not a place for hypocrisy. That lies, hidden motives, and pretense had no home in a community meant to model truth and light. And perhaps, in a way, both are true. The act was both divine judgment and divine mercy. Judgment against deception. Mercy for the community that would learn, through fear, to walk carefully in truth. But whatever your interpretation, one thing is undeniable. The story changed how the church saw itself. It was no longer just a joyful fellowship. It was a sacred people, accountable not just to each other, but to God himself. And so the suspenseful question remains. Do you think God acted directly here, striking them down in real time? Or was this story told to serve as a warning, to keep hypocrisy from taking root? What's your take? The shock of Ananias and Sapphira's deaths did not destroy the young church. In fact, it did the opposite. The apostles' authority was solidified. No one could mistake their leadership as ordinary. These were men through whom the Spirit of God worked, men before whom secrets could not be hidden. Outsiders, once dismissive, now took the movement seriously. Some feared to join, but those who did were utterly devoted. The book of Acts tells us that more and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. And even in the shadow of this terrifying event, miracles continued. The sick were brought into the streets. The lame were healed. Evil spirits fled. The same community that trembled in fear also thrived in power. But the lesson was clear. God values integrity over appearances. It was never about the money. It was about the heart. Hypocrisy, however subtle, carries devastating consequences. It tears apart trust. It poisons unity. It corrodes what was meant to be holy. And fear, not the fear that paralyzes, but the fear that humbles, became the shaping force of faith. Reverence reminded the believers that God was not merely a comforting presence, but a consuming fire. But what about us today? We live in a world where appearance often matters more than honesty, where carefully crafted images on screens hide fractured realities, where success is measured not by truth, but by what others see. This story asks us, what is the price of lying, even when no one else sees? What is the cost of pretending while holding back the truth in secret? If this lesson challenges you as much as it challenges me, don't just watch in silence. Subscribe now, because truth should never be ignored. Ananias and Sapphira remind us that faith is not a performance. Integrity is the unseen cornerstone of belief. A lie spoken in secret can echo louder than 1,000 public words. The empire of Rome would eventually collapse. The apostles themselves would eventually die, one by one. But this story, this moment still survives. Not to terrify, but to awaken. And the question is, awaken to what? To the reality that holiness matters. That truth cannot be hidden forever. That every choice, every word, every motive is seen by the one who judges hearts. So let me ask you, would you have dared to lie, thinking no one would ever know? Or would you have told the truth, no matter the cost? Share your answer below. If you believe this story still speaks today, subscribe now, because truth does not grow weaker with time. And if you can watch this story and still not subscribe, then at least tell us why in the comments, because your silence may be the loudest answer of all.